Hey, it's Clay. Welcome to another video. I am going to do some discussion today about miking guitar amplifiers. This is not going to be an exhaustive tutorial or guide or anything. I'm hoping that this could be kind of a follow-up to give you my thoughts and some of the techniques that I use to mic my guitar cabinets. There's a lot of good information on the internet you can look up, and hopefully I can just build on top of that to give you some of my experiences. So I guess a couple limitations. I'm only going to be talking about using guitar amps and using microphones on speaker cabinets. So lots of other miking techniques about vocals or acoustic guitars or things I'm not necessarily going to cover. We're going to focus only on electric guitar amps. Let's start with just a couple of basic premises and assumptions. Point number one that I want to make is that you can get some very, very effective results with some pretty minimal equipment. For example, a Shure SM57 or a relatively inexpensive condenser mic, this is an Audio-Technica AT2020, is capable of achieving some pretty impressive results. You don't have to go and spend thousands of dollars on a microphone to get a good result. That's not to say that those mics don't do anything or aren't worth investing. It's just to say that some basic tools can be very effective. I've been using some relatively inexpensive mics with a pretty basic audio interface and getting some results that I've been pretty happy with. But the flip side of that is that in order to use whatever tools you get, whether they're inexpensive or expensive, the biggest variable is going to be your skill and your ability to use the tools that you have at your disposal to get the results that you want. So the biggest variables that you need to consider are going to be, what mic you use, how you use it in terms of where you place it, and how you control some of these variables to get the sound that you want. Like I said, these microphones and the interfaces and the preamps, they're just tools. The biggest variable is you and your ability to use these tools effectively. So, with some of those basics in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at a guitar cabinet, and we'll talk about how I go about miking it up. Okay, so what we're looking at now is my 212 cabinet. And I guess just a couple of initial thoughts. So the first step that I approach to when I'm trying to get a mic'd guitar signal going is you want to think about the source. The source that you're using being the guitar, the pickups, the amp, the speaker cabinet. The source is very important. And I think sometimes it can be a little bit overlooked. If you're trying to achieve a specific type of sound, the source that you're using is really important. And I guess specifically with guitars, I want to talk about speaker cabinets. Speaker cabinets are probably, in my opinion, the biggest tone shaping variable that you have. An amplifier being a very close, if not tied, second. But the amp and the speaker cabinet that you choose makes such a huge impact on the end result. So start with those variables. Now, from here, we're going to assume that you've got a setup that you like, that you're getting a sound, when you're just sitting in the room playing, that you're getting a tone that you really enjoy, and you just want to try to capture that sound. We're going to move forward from there, assuming that that's where you're at. So, a couple of thoughts. Number one, the cabinet that you are using will interact with your room. And so I think it's helpful and important to take some considerations about the room that you're in. Now, this talk about room can be kind of overwhelming. If you are just trying to get a mic'd up guitar signal, it's impossible to tell you exactly how much the room will impact you. And I'm not saying that you need to go out and buy thousands of dollars of studio treatment. In fact, I don't have any treatment done in this room, and I probably should. But in my estimation, the room that you record in does make a pretty significant difference. So what I will say is to just think and be conscious about physically where you put the speaker cabinet. So as you can see, I have this up on a chair, and I kind of have it angled slightly. I've done a lot of experimenting, and this is just kind of a setup that I've come to really like. When I put the cabinet on the ground, what happens is I've got two speakers, one here and one here, and they are producing a cone, right? So they're fanned out like this. So they send a guitar signal in all directions away from the cone. And when you have it on the ground, so this part of the speaker is shooting signal in this direction. You have a tremendous amount of your signal that's just going straight into the ground and not necessarily filling up the airspace, and that's where your microphone is. It's up in the air. So I find that getting it elevated, or maybe a tilt back, or maybe getting it out of a corner. I have carpeted floor, and there's a lot of cement going on here, so this really isn't an optimal recording environment. So getting it off the floor is helping me to keep the speaker cabinet a little bit more open and a little bit less muddy. Now, additionally, the angle of the cabinet makes a difference. You've got a tremendous amount of sound projecting this way, and if you have, like I do, a hard flat wall, I don't know, maybe 10 feet away, you're going to get some reflections coming back towards the cabinet. And now you can get some microphones like this SM57, which will block a lot of the sound coming from this direction, but you're still going to get some of that reflection going on, and that's not always helpful. So doing a little bit of a tilt, and maybe I could even do a little more, helps me to reduce some of that reflections going on. And you can do a lot of things with this. Putting the speaker cabinet more in the middle of the room, it's kind of impractical, but then you are doing a nice job of keeping the cabinet in a place where you're not firing at one end of a wall, or you kind of keep it more centered in the middle to reduce some of that. If you have any, you don't have to spend a lot of money on acoustic treatment. Things like bookshelves with a lot of books will absorb sound. You can build some of this yourself. I've seen some guys build some bass traps. And that's another point, is that a lot of times the corners of the room tend to accumulate and absorb a lot of that low end. And so getting it away, like where I have this Bugera over here in the corner, is not the optimal place to record, because you're going to absorb a lot of low end frequencies there. So just kind of be mindful of where you place your speaker cabinet. Think about how it's going to interact in the room. Just try some different setups, and you'll find something that works for you. Okay, so let's actually start talking about using a microphone and placement and things like that. The first point that I want to make is that I think when you're starting, you are really looking for what I call a recipe, which says, like a step-by-step process. So get an SM57 and stick it on this position on the speaker and set these levels and hit record, and you're going to be good to go. Unfortunately, I think that can be misleading and maybe not so helpful. When you're starting off, some of those things can give you some quick direction, but I think that really the best thing that you can do is see a lot of these different decisions that you can make as variables. So I'll make an analogy. You have a guitar amplifier, and let's say it has controls like gain, bass, middle, treble, presence, master volume, reverb. There isn't necessarily one setting that is quote-unquote best. You probably have a variety of different settings that produce a variety of different results, and it's very similar with miking. You have a lot of different little decisions that you can make that can tweak or shift or change your tone in small little ways, but a lot of those small little decisions can add up in the end with a final result. So think of these decisions that you make, like microphone placement, as like a treble control, where you are tweaking or shifting something specific about the sound. So what you really want to do is learn what the different variables do and how they interact with your end result. So what I would recommend at this point is to teach you guys what microphone placement does. The best thing that you can do is to get a pair of headphones, connect it to your audio interface, and then get a loop pedal and play some sort of stock basic loop on your guitar into the amp, into the speaker, and just let it run for a while. And then set your mic up. And what I would do is just try a whole bunch of different positions, and then use your headphones, so move away from the speaker cabinet and use your headphones to listen intently on what the different placement positions do. So, for example, you want to first of all get a feel for where your speaker is. I know where the speaker is because I've used this cabinet a number of times, but right here we have a wooden block, and then we've got one speaker right about here and one speaker right about here. You can take a flashlight and flash it, and that will help you see through the grill cloth. So that just helps give you a reference. So if I start, like a good place to start is to just stick the speaker right dead in the center of the cone. Play your looper pedal, and then go back to the other room and listen to the recording live, the monitor of the recording live, and just get a feel for how it sounds. Then come back and maybe shift it a little bit to the side. Now we're about probably right where the cone meets the dust cap. See how it changes the sound. And really, the best thing, you can read a lot of articles, you can watch a lot of videos, and they'll tell you, well, okay, when you're right in the middle, it's going to be really bright, and as you move out to the edge of the speaker, it's going to get darker. But I think the best thing to do is to just listen for yourself and to hear how it sounds with your own equipment and your own setup, because, you know, these things are all variable. You can adjust the treble of your signal in a whole variety of different situations, from the treble control on the amp to where you place the speaker, to what speakers you use, and then you've even got EQ inside the DAW that you use. So you have a lot of places that you can control these things. But what I've found is that you also want to pay attention to the feel of the, so if you're putting the microphone right here in the middle, not only is it going to be brighter, but the pick attack is going to be very present and transient and sharp. And as you move away, not only do you get quote-unquote darker in terms of treble, but the way that the sound changes, because the speaker is producing different frequencies, so it's going to react a little bit differently. So experiment. You've got this whole range, to take this off for a second. You start in the middle, go to the outside, play around with this entire range of the speaker of where you place the microphone. Now, not only is the side to side, up and down, is this a variable, but you also have distance. And then distance is a very, very important factor. So I can put it right here in the middle, but I can pull it back about 6 inches. Even 3 inches is going to make a difference. You can pull it back a whole foot if you like. And then the last variable I want to mention is also axis. What that refers to is if you are pointed at the center of the speaker, but you're kind of coming at it from an angle like this, this is axis. That's another variable. And like I said, the very best thing that you guys can do is to get your looper pedal, play a riff over and over again, and just take your mic and play around with it and listen to what it does in the headphones. That was the best way for me to internalize some of these things. So with that said, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what some of the things that I like to do. So first and foremost, the biggest thing I want to say is that, like I said, these are all choices that you can make to affect your end result. But it's, like I said, it's not about finding the perfect setting to rule them all. It's about finding settings that work well in different applications. So for example, taking the mic and putting it up really, really close, right in the center, this is going to result in a very, very direct, in-your-face type sound. And this could be really, really good if you are maybe playing in some more aggressive styles of music and you want your guitars to be very aggressive. This is a very aggressive mic position. And if you're going to layer a lot of multi-tracks, so a lot of guitar players will hard pan left and right and double track, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. This is a nice position because it's very straightforward. It's very direct, and it's very you're not getting as much dimension or space or ambience, and you don't necessarily want dimension and space or ambience in all of your recordings. If you're getting your dimension and space and ambience from a multi-track or from some plugins, then have your direct signal be very be very straight on and pure. Now, on the flip side, for a lot of the product demonstrations that I do, if I'm doing a demo of an amp, I find that pulling the microphone away from the amp, maybe 6 inches to a foot, it really changes the feel of the recording. You get a lot more of the room involved, because if you think about it, when you play guitar, you don't stick your head like this and play guitar. Nobody does that. You would probably go deaf. And so when you're trying to get a feel for how something sounds, do you want to know how it sounds right up here? I mean, that can be useful if you're a recording artist, but if you're trying to get a feel for something in the room, or if you're trying to create a musical expression that is a little more live sounding, or a little bit more honest, or just kind of intimate, maybe is the word, pulling the microphone back brings in more of the reflections of the room. And in my experience, that can provide some really cool dimension. It's not quite reverb, but it is very neat in what it does to give you some depth and dimension. Now, another thing I want to mention, so you've got all these variables to play with. Now let's add even another variable, and that is going to be another microphone. So a very popular technique, and one that I also enjoy to use, is the use of multiple mics. And a common one that you'll see is something like a SM57, which is a dynamic microphone, paired with something like a ribbon mic, like an Rode R121. It's probably one of the more famous combinations. And the idea here is that you're using different mics. And notice how I've talked very little about the different microphones. But you're using different mics with different characteristics, again, as to kind of blend the things that you like about each mic together to get a little bit more well-rounded or holistic signal. And again, I don't want you guys to get caught up so much on the specifics of the microphone choice. I want you guys to think about how to use the tools in the way that you want. So for example, this Audio-Technica is a large diaphragm condenser mic. To my ear, it has a very different sound and feel to the SM57. The SM57 works really nicely when you stick it up close to a speaker. It can handle really high sound pressure levels. It's good, it's raw, it's direct, it's dry, and it's good for that sound. And so one of the things that I like to do is to pair it with this mic. Now, a couple of choices you have here is you can do a second close mic, so you can put it up close like this, and then what you're doing is you're mostly focusing on the EQ. So maybe you put the SM57 right on, and then you put the dynamic a little bit further away, maybe off axis, whatever you want to do. That can be really nice. Another way that I like to use is to use this mic as a room microphone. And so what I actually will do here is I will take my mic stand and I will put this mic right where my head is. So when I'm sitting and listening and playing, I'll just stick the mic where my head is. So I'm trying to think about this as the closest approximation I can get to what my ear is hearing. And, so then this almost becomes like a dedicated room or reverb mic to, again, provide some of that ambiance and depth that I like out of a mic that's pulled further away, with the dry, direct, kind of raw nature of a mic that's close. Now, when you do this, you need to be very careful about phase, because, and phase is a pretty in-depth topic, but phase is basically what happens when you... I found the best way to think about phase is to think about physically what's happening when you're recording. So if you have a mic right here, when you play the note, it goes through the amp, through the speaker, and it is released into the air. Now, there's all sorts of science and physics that goes into amplitude and the time that it takes for a signal to science about how a signal travels through air. But an audio signal has a speed at which it travels through space. And if the microphone is right here, it's going to take obviously a very short amount of time to hit the microphone. If you've got a second microphone that is 6 feet away, it's going to take a much longer time for that signal to hit the microphone. Now, when I say much longer, I'm talking about a relatively short amount of time that is usually milliseconds long, So in your DAW, when you have these two recordings, you are going to need to probably adjust the phase And what I do in Reaper is I just zoom in literally as close as you possibly can to the two signals, and you will see the it looks like a ocean wave where you've got the peaks and the troughs, and you want to try to align them as closely as possible so that they're both peaking together and troughing together. That will bring the signals in phase and avoid some of that phase problems where you have a lot of comb filtering and stuff like that. But you can achieve a similar result if you use just multi-track takes. So just use 157, put it on the speaker, play your, let's say you're doing just some simple power chords for a verse, play it, record it, and then do a second take and just do the exact same thing, but take the two tracks and pan them hard left and hard right. And the differences in your playing, or even if you play it both very, very accurately, there are going to be tiny little minute differences in timing and intensity of the notes that you play. That's going to create a very similar level of ambience. So those are just kind of some tips and tricks you can use. And even you can go a step further, and maybe the second time you use a different pedal or a different amp setting or amp or speaker or mic, just to, again, create some depth and dimension. Are some interesting ways to kind of make your recording sound a little bit cooler.